This is a lovely, gentle landscape, isn't it? I've always had a passion for gentle landscape. Like in the south of England, where I grew up, in Surrey and Hampshire and Dorsetshire and Sussex. And then later, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the Amish country. And now here in Poitou, in the middle of France. I'm David Ogilvy, and this is Touffou. And it's one of the most beautiful flower arrangements you've ever made. I've been asked to start this film by telling you the story of my life. So here goes. 70 years in 7 minutes. I grew up in Guildford, near London, in a house which had belonged to Lewis Carroll. I actually met Alice Liddell, the original Alice in Wonderland. And I knew Beatrix Potter in those days. She's still my favorite author. When I was 13, I went away to a boarding school in Scotland. I played the double bass in the orchestra, but that's about all I did. I was a miserable athlete. To this day, I can't play tennis or golf, only croquet, my only game. However, I managed to get a history scholarship at Oxford. My college, Christchurch, had been founded by Henry VIII. It has produced countless prime ministers, viceroys of India, archbishops of Canterbury, and 1 or 2 advertising men. Also, by the way, William Penn and Wesley. But I was terribly lazy at Oxford. I'd never passed any exams. So after 2 years, they threw me out. What a dope I was to let that happen. Then I went to Paris and became a chef in the kitchens of the Hotel Majestic on the Avenue Kléber. It was hard work, 63 hours a week, standing ramrod straight over red-hot stoves. There were no unions in those days in the kitchen. Monsieur Pitard, our head chef, was a terrifying man. He used to fire chefs on the spot, out, when he was not satisfied with their work. One time, Pitard was watching me decorate frogs' legs, most exquisite work. It was an important day because the President of France was coming to dinner. Suddenly, Pitard, watching me, signaled for the other chefs to come over to my table. Son of a bitch, I thought, he's going to fire me, and he wants an audience. But I kept going, my knees were knocking together, like castanets. When the whole brigade was gathered around, I was working away, Pitard pointed to my work and said to the others, "That is the way to do it." It was the proudest moment of my life. A few hours later, I saw the President of France eating my frog's legs. The following week, he died. The newspaper said he'd been shot by a crazy Russian assassin. Then I went back to Scotland and sold Aga cooking stoves door to door. Here's a model of an Aga. It's the most expensive cooking stove in the world, and by far the best. It used to take me half an hour to make the sale. It's about 3,000 words. Maybe that's why I still have a tendency to write such darn long copy. Here's some copy I wrote the other day for the World Wildlife Fund. Back from the Dead. It's 5,500 words. You know, the direct response experts have found that long copy sells more than short copy. Then I got a job with Dr. Gallup in Princeton, New Jersey, doing research for Hollywood, for the motion picture industry. Here's some of my reports. I was able to predict how many people would see a motion picture before it was filmed. My clients were people like David Selznick and Sam Goldwyn. I got to meet a lot of the movie stars and the great directors and so on, and I ruined some of the stars by revealing that they were not so popular with the public as the studios had believed. At that time, Gallup was also research director at Young and Rubicam, and he taught me the concept of factor analysis, trying to identify factors which make some advertising campaigns succeed while others fail. That's really what our magic lantern's all about. During the Hitler War, I worked for the British Intelligence Service. under Sir William Stevenson, a man called Intrepid. And then I became a tobacco farmer near Intercourse in Pennsylvania. All my neighbors were Amish, that extraordinary Christian sect which emigrated from Germany during the 18th century. To this day, they don't drive cars, they drive buggies. They plow with horses instead of tractors. They use candles instead of electric light. They don't have television or radio. I thought their way of life was happier than ours, and I still think so. But as a farmer, I was a flop. So I went to New York and started Ogilvy and Mather. By that time, I was 38, which was leaving it pretty late in life to embark on a new career. People on Madison Avenue thought I was nuts. What could a Scotsman know about advertising? More than they did. I'd read every book that had ever been published on the subject, and I was really a student of advertising. It was my avocation, and still is. At the start, I was billed as the research director. Then one day I had a big idea. Amazing. Who ever heard of a research director having an idea? Guinness had asked us to do an ad about drinking Guinness stout with oysters. I read a book on shellfish by a Yale biologist and came up with this advertisement, The Guinness Guide to Oysters. It was a smash hit. During the next year or two, I had some more big ideas, like making our client Commander Whitehead at Schweppes the hero in all his advertising. This campaign ran for 18 years. Then I thought of using an eye patch for Hathaway shirts. This idea is still going strong 27 years later. It's really marvelous if you get a big idea which you can use for a long time. Then I did a good ad for Rolls-Royce. Here it is. My early campaigns appeared only in the New Yorker, but they put Ogilvy and Mather on the map. We became hot, but our billings were very small, so I couldn't afford to hire anybody for more than $10,000 a year. I had to get some big accounts so I could afford to hire some better people. On the very first day, I'd kept a secret list in my desk, a list of the 5 clients that I wanted to get sooner or later. Shell, Lever Brothers, Campbell Soup, General Foods, and Bristol Myers. That was it. And in due course, I got them all. It took me a few years, but I got them all. For Shell, I used big spaces in newspapers at first. Nobody had ever sold gasoline like this before, telling all about the ingredients and how the product works. For Rinser, which for Lever Brothers, I showed how to get out stains. See that blood stain? That was my blood. I pricked my finger and squeezed the blood onto the page. How many copywriters have actually bled for their clients? For Dove, also at Lever Brothers, I said that Dove is 1/4 cleansing cream. It creams your skin while you wash. That campaign is still running 26 years later. Then I wrote Confessions of an Advertising Man. This thing, you may have seen it. It was a bestseller in 13 languages, and it still required reading in business schools all over the world. By that time, we were no longer a boutique. We were becoming a major agency, really all because of big ideas. I'd gotten to be quite famous in our trade in a modest way. Fortune wrote an article about me. Columbia Broadcasting System made a television program about me. Queen Elizabeth made me a commander of the British Empire. Here it is. Here's my medal. She hung round my neck. Remember, she asked me, "What is your work?" I said, "I'm in the advertising business in New York." You should have seen the expression on her face, a mixture of incredulity, horror, and amusement. All my private papers were put in the Library of Congress. I went on television talk shows, and that led to me being offered the lead in a Broadway play called Roar Like a Dove. I refused it, so it only ran for a week. I got invitations to parties at the White House, and I was made a Doctor of Letters at Delphi University. Doctor of Letters, why don't people ever call me Dr. Ogilvy? I was made chairman of the United Negro College Fund and did a lot of work for other charities like the New York Philharmonic and Colby College. I loved all that stuff, but the agency, I was working too hard. I was overworking. The agency was far too dependent on one man. I'd brought in most of the business and produced most of the big ideas up to that time. And I was afraid that if anything happened to me, the whole thing might go up in smoke. So I dropped out of the limelight and became the world's best delegator. This gave my very able partners a chance to blossom. Pretty soon I'd organized myself out of a job. So I came to live here at Touffou, far from the madding crowd. I still work, but not the way I used to. I see the campaigns created by all our offices, and sometimes I comment on them. I travel a good deal, visiting our offices in different parts of the world. I write magic lanterns. I get involved on some of our accounts. I got a telex machine in the next room, and it chatters away, so I'm in touch with what is going on. Well, that's the story of my life so far. I've got some work to do in the next room. Now let's talk about big ideas. Big ideas. Now that's what the advertising business is really all about. If you're lazy, you may sometimes lack into creating a big idea, but my advice is to start by doing your homework. Some flashy agencies scorn homework. They skid about on the surface of irrelevant brilliance. Other agencies are good at research and positioning, defining target audiences and so on, but are incapable of creative brilliance. As I see it, we have to do our homework and create brilliant campaigns. I'm going to let you in on some of the ways that I found out to create brilliant campaigns. But first, do your homework. Study the product. The more you know about the product, the more likely you are to come up with a big idea for selling it. Study the precedents. Look up the campaigns for similar products in recent years. Find out which worked and which didn't work, and then go on better. Study the research, how consumers think about your kind of product, what benefit you should promise them. But don't rely too much on research. A lot of people in our trade use research the way a drunkard uses a lamppost for support, not for illumination. Get agreement on positioning. Get agreement on your target audience. Get agreement on brand image. It pays to give most products an image of quality, a first-class ticket. This is particularly true of products you wear, like whiskey and cigarettes and automobiles. Unfortunately, most advertising is created ad hoc, hence the lack of any consistent image from one year to another. Don't get the idea that your office is the only one in Ogilvy and Mather. We have 91 other offices. If one of them creates a campaign, a good one, for one of our international clients, at least test it in your country. Resistance to using good ideas from other countries is almost always due to the not invented here syndrome, NIH. Why should multinational clients employ Ogilvy and Mather worldwide if our offices refuse to borrow from each other? You know, most advertising campaigns are much too complicated. They reflect a long list of objectives. They try to reconcile the views of too many people. By attempting too many things, they achieve nothing. Many commercials and many advertisements look like the minutes of a committee, which is what they are. Boil down your strategy to one simple promise and go the whole hog in delivering that promise. The promise should be important and unique. And use research to find out what promise is most persuasive. Look before you leap. Perhaps the single most important word in the lexicon of advertising is test. Always keep testing. Testing new ideas, new headlines, new levels of spending, new media combinations, new kinds of commercials. Test, test, test. That's why I think everyone should start his advertising career in direct response. Because in direct response you test all the time, and you acquire the habit of testing. Strategy is of paramount importance, but a good strategy can fail if it is badly executed. If nobody looks at your commercials, it won't do you much good to have the right positioning and the right promise. You can't save souls in an empty church. When Dr. Gallup was research director at Young and Rubicam long ago, He measured how many people read every advertisement. Now, after a time, he noticed that some techniques almost always performed above average. Then one day I read a book by Dr. Harold Rudolph reporting the same kind of research. He'd found one technique that attracted a lot of readers. Photographs which contained story appeal. Something unusual and interesting happening in the photograph, a story. So when I had to do a campaign for Hathaway shirts, I looked for story appeal and hit on the eye patch. This worked well, and it's still working 30 years later. So you see, research led me to the idea which put our agency on the map and made Hathaway famous. I advise you always to try and inject story appeal into your photographs. You can't always do it, but try. Do your best, story appeal. Now, news. News works well in advertising. If you have news, don't bury it in your body copy. Put it in the headline, loud and clear. Testimonials also work well. This one comes from our Singapore office. An ex-safecracker confesses that he never cracked a Chubb safe. Testimonial. The headline is decisive. A change in headline can produce a dramatic increase in sales. One advertisement can sell 19 times more than another. Keep testing new headlines by split run. Include the brand name and the promise in the headline. I always do that. It increases recall. How to get your money back at Sears. There's the promise, how to get your money back. And there's the brand name, Sears, right up there in the headline. Be sure your headline is easily understood at a glance. Readers don't jump from blind headlines into body copy. How many words should you put in a headline? A department store found that headlines of 10 words sold more merchandise than short headlines. You get the same result in direct response advertisements. Headlines between 6 and 12 words pull the most with coupons on the average. Here's a curious thing. If you put quotes around your headline, a lot more people remember it. Here's a headline which has 17 words and quotes. I'm going to read it to you. At 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Rolls-Royce comes from the electric clock, unquote. 17 words and quotes. People buy magazines to read the articles. 6 times as many people read the articles as read the advertisements. It seems to me that editors must know how to communicate better than we ad men. We ad men have an unconscious belief that an ad has to look like an ad. Ad layout signal to the reader, this is only an ad, skip it. So always pretend you're an editor. When it comes to actually writing the copy for the advertisement, pretend you're in conversation with a friend. She asks you which refrigerator you could recommend. Your answer should be personal, factual, truthful, and interesting. Don't be a bore. You cannot bore people into buying your product. You can only interest them in buying it. In my experience, when you have a complicated message to deliver, long copy works better than short. This is a house ad I wrote. It took me 23 years to write it. How to create advertising that sells. That's got 2,651 words of copy in it. By the way, I have no rules. No rules. I simply observe how people react to different stimuli. If I had one rule, it would be this. Never set body copy in reverse. White type on black background. It's physically impossible to read it. If you get in a jam with a client, here's an idea for you. In verse. When the client moans and sighs, make his logo twice the size. If he still should prove refractory, show a picture of his factory. Only in the gravest cases should you show the client's faces. Here's an advertisement of mine which did that. We had the client's face in it 11 times. There she is, Helena Rubinstein. There's her photograph and 10 portraits of her by Chellichev, Marie Laurencin, Graham Sutherland, all kinds of people. Now I'm going to give you some tips on television. I have to confess that I've never been much good at television commercials, writing them myself, but I think I once won a gold medal at Cannes for a commercial for Maxwell's. It was a lousy commercial. But I've never been very good at writing, but I have studied it quite a lot, and I know a little about it, seen a lot of research, looked at a lot of commercials, thought about it a lot. I think here again, some techniques seem to work better than others. For example, problem solution works like gangbusters. So does slice of life, little playlets which show the doubter being converted. People seem to identify with the doubter, and you convert them. You know, Procter & Gamble specialize in slice of life. Guess why? It sells. We've done well by using characters to sell products, like Titus Moody, who's been selling Pepperidge Farm bread for 25 years. Cora sold Maxwell House coffee for 7 years, and so on. If I were you, I wouldn't use celebrities. Our research shows that people often remember the celebrity, but forget the product. I made that mistake once when I got Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, to advertise margarine. Demonstrations are above average. You show how the product works. Here is one demonstration commercial.
En cinquième.
Regardez, nous allons vous montrer l'incroyable efficacité de la colle superglue. Lisez le mode d'emploi. Superglue colle le bois, le fer, la céramique et le caoutchouc en 10 secondes seulement. Et ce film est réalisé sans trucage.
Bon. Et maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'on fait?
Superglue colle en 10 secondes.
Commercials with news are above average. Here's one. That was photographed in the north of Scotland, my native land. If your product is not demonstrable, not demonstrably better than competition, it often pays to use emotion. Here is an emotional commercial.
Dreams. You must dream of what you can become before you can become it. Our children must have dreams. That's one of the reasons for nationwide life insurance programs, to protect their dreams.
Who can you call on for better insurance? Who can you call nationwide? Who can you count on for blanket protection and know that you'll find peace of mind? Call nationwide, 'cause nationwide is on your side.
I have no research to prove it, but I believe that charm can be a valuable ingredient in commercials. Here's an example of charm.
Chegou o Lipton, o mais inglês dos chás brasileiros. Lipton, um chá preto para novos hábitos. Entre no ritmo de Lipton, um chá para dois. O mais.
For some products, nostalgia seems to work well. Here is an example of nostalgia.
grandfather came to Harney County, around 1882. My dad was born here on the ranch, and my family's been here ever since.
Howard Otley's a rancher in southeastern Oregon.
You know, Harney County is still ranching country, and it's still pretty much the way it was.
His way of doing things is still the natural way. And we believe that's the best way for living or brewing beer. That's why Blitz Weinhardt is brewed only with natural ingredients in the traditional, natural way.
I haven't been to too many other places in the country, but I don't think there'd be many like this anymore.
Blitz country. Natural country. Natural beer.
When you're selling products to children, cartoons and animation can be effective. But animation doesn't work with grown-ups. Remember that. Now, what about music? Music can help you establish a mood, but for goodness sake, don't sing the sales pitch. 9 times out of 10, people cannot hear the words in a jingle. If you've nothing to say, sing it. Use close-ups as much as possible, especially when you're advertising food. For goodness sake, don't use visual cliches like happy families at the dinner table, sunsets and sunrises. Try to surprise people with things they've never seen before. Very few advertising people appreciate the supreme importance of casting. Eccentric casting can be incredibly effective. Next to dullness, the most common crime in advertising is to conceal the name of your product. A lot of research has been done on this. A shocking percentage of consumers cannot name the brand and commercials they've just seen. They often attribute the advertising to a competing brand. I have one more thing to say about television, and it's very important. If you have a truly big idea, the wrong technique won't kill it. And if you don't have a big idea, the right technique won't help you. The research on which all this is based has been going on for years. It's remarkable how little the results have changed over the years. Consumers go on reacting to the same techniques in the same ways, year after year, all over the world. However, things do sometimes change. During the last year, for example, we discovered for the first time that funny commercials can be very effective at the cash register. They didn't used to be. I recently learned that emotion can sell some products better than rational reason. Why? Particularly products which are no different from their competitors. I think I've always underestimated the importance of emotion. By the way, there are still a lot of things I don't know. And I don't believe anyone else does either, for that matter. For all our research, I don't really know how to make a good radio commercial or a good billboard. To tell you the truth, I hate billboards. They louse up the landscape. I think they ought to be abolished. I thought that for years. So keep your mind open. Advertising will always be full of surprises. Since I escaped from the hurly-burly daily agency life and came to live here at Touffou, I've had more time to think. I've been thinking a lot about the agency business. Perhaps if I tell you what I've been thinking, you can start where I leave off. First, a word about the people who hire us to do their advertising, our clients. You know, some clients are an inspiration, and some are a malediction. My motto has always been, only first-class business, and that in a first-class way. Identify yourself with your clients. Get to know their business thoroughly. Always tell the client what you would do if you were in his shoes, but never grudge him the prerogative of deciding what advertising to run. It's his product, it's his company, and it's his money. You know, what clients want from us is big ideas. Unless your advertising has a big idea, it will pass like a ship in the night. I once dreamed a big idea, a wagon with 2 white horses delivering Pepperidge Farm bread. That wagon is still being used today, 25 years later. If a research man like me can come up with big ideas, so can you. So you don't have to be a copywriter. So-called creative people have no monopoly on good ideas. So be ambitious. Raise your sights. Blaze new trails. Try to make advertising history. Are you a hard worker? There's a saying in Scotland that hard work never killed a man. I can't stand lazy people. If you work twice as hard as the person in the next office, you will achieve 5 times as much and climb the ladder like a bat out of hell. I also hate toadies. People who suck up to their bosses and bully people at lower levels. I don't like office politicians or liars. I don't like poachers or crybabies or buck passers. I admire people with guts under pressure, resilience in adversity, imagination, curiosity, grace, human kindness, and intellectual honesty. I love people who make me laugh, and I've got a special weakness for sailors and skiers and bird watchers and mountaineers. I like gentlemen with brains. Are you having any fun? I've noticed that agencies which are full of fun and foment seem to create the best advertising. There's another Scottish proverb, be happy while you're living, for you're a long time dead. If you're not happy in advertising, for goodness sake, find a job in which you would be happy. Because as far as I know, we pass this way only once. The people who contribute most in our business have a marvelous quality of enthusiasm, gusto, infectious gusto. They're innovative. The beginning of greatness in advertising is to be different, and the beginning of failure is to be orthodox. I cannot tell you what a lot I've learned by picking other people's brains. People like Raymond Rubicam and Dr. Gallup and John Caples. Whose brains are you picking? Learn to write well. Learn to write lucid, well-organized memos and letters. I've noticed that the best writers in Ogilvy and Mather happen to be the directors of our company. Don't fritter away your time in committees. If you're a copywriter, shut the door and write, all by yourself. Committees can criticize, but they cannot create. Never run an advertisement you wouldn't want your own family to see. Tell the truth, but make the truth fascinating. You know, you can't bore people into buying your product. You can only interest them in buying it. The consumer's not a moron. She's your wife. Don't insult her intelligence, and don't shock her. A lot of consumers are not as sophisticated as you are. You may think it's amusing to make fun of clergymen, but a lot of people don't. Most of the work you do in the advertising business is routine, maintenance work. But every now and then you get an opportunity to do something special. This is your golden moment. Cover yourself with glory. Rise to the occasion. Give it everything you've got. Work day and night until the job is done. Do this and you'll never have to ask for a promotion, never have to ask for a raise. See this Russian doll of mine? It's my favorite doll. It contains the secret of success in advertising management, agency management. It's the big one on the outside, and I'm going to undo it. Inside there's a smaller one, and then a smaller one. We get down, smaller, and smaller, and smaller, and smaller. This is a little dwarf doll, and inside there's a message, and I'm going to read it to you. Listen. If each of us has someone smaller than we are, we shall become a company of dwarfs. But if each of us has someone bigger than we are, we shall become a company of giants. Well, there we are. I hope you don't make as many mistakes as I've made. I've made some frightful mistakes. Like turning down an obscure little office machinery account that I'd never heard of. It was called Xerox. And then I was always a terrible coward about firing non-performers. And I frittered away far too much time on things which weren't really important. I failed to recognize some big ideas when they came along. May God forgive me. I made a mistake when I gave up creative work and concentrated on management. I regret that. And I was always petrified of losing accounts. The first one I lost was Guinness, and I wept in the client's face. Now, wait a second. I have to tell you, I have to admit that my heyday, I resigned 5 times as many times as I was fired. You know, here at Touffou, I've succeeded in forgetting all the disagreeable aspects of the agency business, like losing accounts, and losing good people, which is worse. I've forgotten the hellish pressure, 16 hours a day, 16 days a week, 6 days a week, and 3 briefcases. I've gotten a lot of happiness out of advertising, like seeing poverty-stricken Puerto Rico become a little less poverty-stricken as a result of our advertising. I've never been bored by my job. Above all, I've made some wonderful friends. Friends with my partners, and with our clients, and with some of our competitors. I'd like to be remembered as what? As a copywriter who had some big ideas. That's what the advertising business is all about, big ideas.